At the beginning of another week, look, we'll take you all over the country tonight, but real and differing problems are confronting Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria. I noticed a young woman in WA who snuck across WA's hard border, hidden on the back of a truck. She concealed herself from authorities at the border from South Australia because she was told she'd have to quarantine for 14 days. She pleaded guilty. She said she self-quarantined. She was meant to quarantine at her own expense, but she said she couldn't afford it. She's been sentenced to 6 months in jail. Now, I guess you can't ignore the law, but the questions are now being asked, aren't they, everywhere? How many freedoms are we prepared to surrender? How much longer can we endure this police state? And one other point before we get into it, what the hell is going on in relation to the two Australians, the vet Lucas Order from Mount Isa and the onboard stockman William Mainprize from Sydney on that cattle boat that was hit by the typhoon and capsized near Japan 9 days ago? Japan's called off the full-time search, and the federal member Bob Katter is rightly saying, well, hang on, the Australian government should intervene. An online petition on change.org is calling for the search to resume. It's pretty grim stuff. There are 4 life rafts and 1 lifeboat not accounted for, but there have been no sightings of any of the dead bodies. 40 crew are missing. Our Prime Minister and Japan's new Prime Minister should get going. There is a hope that these young men are on a raft out there somewhere and possibly alive. But this is what the parents can't cop. When Malaysian Airlines MH370 went down, we searched and paid tens of millions of dollars for up to 2 years. These 2 young men are part of our family, just as you and I and everybody else is. We expect our elected government to represent us. There are 4 lifeboats unaccounted for, and I understand people can live for up to 30 days on a lifeboat. Now, come on, Scott Morrison, get cracking. Throw the appropriate resources into the search effort and tell Japan to pull their weight as well. What do you think? Alan at skynews.com.au. And to keep up to date and to catch up with the interviews or editorials you may have missed, just go to alanjones.com.au and you can listen to the program live on the iHeart Radio app. And remember, by magic, you can text me. I do read them and they're there. There's the number on your screen, 0414 000 848. It's Monday, September 14. Look, before I go to this just fiasco in Victoria, I've just as I came in tonight received a letter here and it says, Dear Mr Jones, my 7-year-old daughter was in tears over lockdown this morning. She's frustrated and sick of everything. She asked me, how can I change this? I didn't have an answer other than to say, write to the decision makers with your reasons. She asked, will they read my letter? And I said, if I send it directly to them, well, if you send it directly to them, no. Not for 8 or 10 weeks, I know, because I've written to them, the dad says. But maybe this way they will. He says to me, please continue to speak for us. A 7-year-old hit all the key points. She did me proud. Dan Andrews, please find a medium ground for the lockdown. Victoria is suffocating. And the little girl's written this letter. Dear Mr Andrews, I'm writing to you because I want you to end lockdown. Here are my reasons why. Firstly, we need friends to be happy. Lockdown stops us from seeing our friends. If we're happy, we have happy minds. Little girl, she's 7. Secondly, I really miss school. I'm bored with being at home all the time and I miss my class friends. Thirdly, we can't keep the shops running from home. They will run out of money. And lastly, we're ready to come out of lockdown because we know how to keep safe with hand washing and masks. Thank you for reading my letter. Emily. Well, Emily, Mr Andrews wouldn't have read your letter, I can tell you that. And I'm not too sure that he cares too much about you, Emily, but most Australians do. My heart bleeds for these people. 1.36 million Victorians will be on JobKeeper in the December quarter, 1.36 million, 880,000 around the rest of the country. I repeat, this was never a pandemic. And even in Europe, as with the flu, people continue to be infected, but there are very few deaths. What price are we paying for what I said from the outset was irresponsible alarmism? Remember all that stuff about intensive care beds and how we'd run out of them? So thousands and thousands of them were set aside in hospital. And people who had other medical conditions were abandoned. But the alarmism continues, and as of today, there are 17 people in intensive care, 120 in hospital. 816 deaths since February, 8 months. Only 9% have died from coronavirus. The others have died with it. But over 450 people die every day in Australia. And to this day, this year, around the world, 9.1 million have died from communicable disease. Of note, there have been over 30 million abortions. Anyone worry about those deaths? 5.7 million have died from cancer to this day. No wonder the Victorian Health Minister, Jenny Mikakos, has gone missing. The two scientists from Melbourne University, whose epidemiology modelling is apparently recognised as world-leading, said their models did not support the extreme lockdowns imposed. Now, this is arguably the greatest public policy disgrace in Australian history. And it appears that Andrews is not prepared to admit he's wrong. Remember the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Brendan Murphy, saying, and I quote, "It's an horrendous scenario." This is early in the year. A daily demand for new intensive care beds of 35,000 plus. Well, the Queensland James Cook University Professor of Infectious Diseases Modelling, Professor Emma McBride, said when she detected the error that those figures were all wrong and her team worked out how it occurred, they contacted the Doherty researchers in Melbourne. They got an email back confirming that the modelling would be updated. That was months ago. Nothing's happened. The federal government were also informed of the mistake. They continue to run with the alarmist figures. They were wrong by a factor of about 400%. Then we were told, remember, the curfew imposed on Melbourne, 8 p.m. to 5 a.m, was not as a consequence of public health advice. It was part of a state of emergency requirement. Nothing to do with public health. Even people in the Labor Party have had a gutful. A former Andrews government MP, now in the federal parliament, Daniel Molino, has urged the Andrews government to release the full modelling underpinning the roadmap to recovery. Well, they won't, because Andrews thrives on the psychology of fear. Businesses are urging the government to lift the wartime curfew, which doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. In fact, Andrews has said it's unlikely there'll be any revision to the reopening map. Today's September 14. The curfew will stay in place until October 26. And even then, if this know-all dictator continues to get his way, Melbourne won't reopen unless there's a 14-day daily average of fewer than 5 cases. The daily average a week ago was 60. There's no epidemiological justification for what's happening, and it's costing the state $1 billion a week. And Andrews thinks he should get credit with a $3 billion support package. What should happen is that Andrews should be told to take out a loan and fund his own vandalism. Politicians can't eradicate viruses. You've got to manage it. And we've known since March how to manage it. Look after the elderly and those with comorbidities. Stop counting breathlessly every day the number of cases. Tell us truthfully how many are critical. You want to know? At the moment, all Australia, 18 are critical. Open up the country and let people get on with their lives. What makes Andrews think he knows anything, let alone the answers? Who the hell is Daniel Andrews, apart from someone we elected mistakenly to run the state? Some of the largest companies in Australia have urged Andrews to lift this curfew, warning that a continued lockdown will cause irreparable damage to the community and the economy. Andrews ignores them. Andrews has never signed a payroll tax slip in his life. He should be gone. As Terry McCrann has written, Rio Tinto's CEO has gone because subordinates, not the CEO, blew up a cave which was a critical Indigenous heritage site. The CEO is gone. But as Terry McCrann says, Victoria's CEO has blown up an entire state, and he did it. Andrews, not the subordinates. He's been wrong on everything. Wrong on quarantining, wrong on modelling, wrong on the lockdowns, wrong on the response to the mess he created. But 22 hours out of 24 hours every day for months, Victorians are locked up. And when he was asked who recommended the curfew, Andrews said he couldn't remember. He didn't want to remember. It was imposed not as a consequence of public health advice. If Andrews can't remember, he's unfit to be Premier. He's running a state which accounts for 89% of all the deaths in Australia. And his own Chief Medical Officer, this bloke Sutton, has admitted that virtually all of these deaths have come from the criminal negligence in relation to hotel quarantining. Perhaps Daniel Andrews can tell us one thing. How many lives have been protected by forcing people to live like battery hens? I'm sick of it. You're sick of it. But it can't escape comment. This is the most savage response anywhere in the world and the most savage devastation, financial and non-financial. When Treasurer Frydenberg says that Victoria's lockdown, stages 3 and 4, would cost the national economy $10 to $12 billion, that was before this roadmap going out to October 26 and beyond, maybe into 2021. This bloke's delusional. The footage you see here is not South America. It's not the US protests. It's not Russia. This is Melbourne at the weekend. People doing their shopping at the Victoria markets. It's unfathomable. And it gets worse. He's been told the modelling was wrong, the curfew's wrong, the lockdown's wrong, children out of school is wrong. Andrews takes no notice. But he'll put his hand out for Australians across the country to pay the bill. We, you and I, will fund this devastation. And the further tragedy of Victorians is, unless Andrews is forced to bear the full cost of the damage he's done, he'll keep on doing it. Scott Morrison has a massive task on his hands, but somehow he's got to stop this rot before it breaks the lot of us. Andrews can no longer be allowed to do things his way.